Good afternoon. I'm Martin Elliott, Media Director for SBC, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar, which we are bringing to you in partnership with our friends at Comm100. We're going to be talking about the role of player support technology, and we're looking in particular at sort of retention, compliance, and of course, we couldn't go anywhere without that buzzword AI, and looking at how that technology is going to feed into how gambling operators and some suppliers function in the coming months. Now, a lot of the debate we're about to be having is informed by a research project that Comm100 and SBC have worked on over the past few months. So there'll be quite a lot of reference to that as we go along. But we also have some input on the findings from the operator community, which is going to save me talking solidly for 45 minutes, which I think you'll all agree is a good thing. So with that, let's briefly introduce the panel. So Scott, start with you if you want to give us a brief introduction to yourself.
Yeah, I'm Scott Burrows. I'm the head of technical compliance at Supervet. So generally looking after the compliance of our platform across all of the jurisdictions in which we operate. Previous to that, I was at a platform provider for 6 or 7 years, leading their platform team as well.
Brilliant, and thanks for joining us today, Scott. And Danis, how about you?
Hi, gents. Yeah, Danis, Chief Operating for the Entain North and Central Europe, taking care of 11 markets from the wide Entain portfolio, so responsible for the customer service and RG as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Ian.
Good afternoon. Yeah, Ian here. I've been in gambling now 19 years and 3 days. Very happy to celebrate that anniversary. But currently, main focus is regulatory affairs and operation based out of Malta for the operator Quiff, which is a UK-focused licensed operator, B2B and B2C.
Great, thank you, Ian. And Nadja?
Sorry, I hope you guys can hear me now. I'm Najim, the content manager at Comm100. I've been keeping a pulse on the gaming market across the EU, UK, and North America for the last 2 years, from the challenges and the opportunities that operators are more concerned about. So yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
That's great, and it's great to have you. And last but by no means least, Phil.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me.
We can.
So yeah, first of all, massive thank you to all of you for attending, and to our panelists, and also to SBC, who's been our partner with a lot of this research. My name is Phil Chatterton, so I run growth and partnerships at Comm100. I've spent, sadly, 22 plus years in enterprise SaaS, the last 15 years as a leader. I've spent a little bit over 3 years primarily focused on the iGaming sector. So that's a brief intro into myself. For those of you who are not familiar with Comm100, we do player CX and support. So we offer AI agents, live chat, ticketing systems. Our goal is really to help operators, help players have the best experience. Right now, we work with a little bit over 1,250 operators across the space. And a big part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation is just really to explore a few different, I think, really, really important topics, which are sort of how support contributes to retention, what's happening in terms of support and responsible gaming. And then I think, Martin, as you alluded to, like beyond the hype cycle around AI, how is it actually contributing to the player experience and to, helping operations for operators?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. So just before we get into it, a little bit of housekeeping. Feel free to ask questions at any point during the discussion, and we'll try to weave those in if we can, using the Q&A function there. There's also a chat function. If you just want to perhaps not ask a question but express an opinion on what we're talking about, then feel free to contribute there as well. So I suppose before we get into the discussion, I should give you a little bit of context about the research itself. There are 3 separate reports which you'll be able to download, and we'll send out some links in the follow-up email to the webinar where you can download them. And we talked in the first one, we had a look at the role of customer support in player protection. The second one focused a little bit more on support and how it helps to drive retention figures. And the third one was very much looking at the sort of the use cases around of AI in player support. And we spoke to in total more than 75 people across mostly operators, 1 or 2 people from suppliers as well. And the breadth of the research included, the geographic breadth included a lot of people from the established Western European markets, in particular UK, Italy, and then some people in Canada and the US, and a bit further south through a number of the countries in Latin America, where some quite exciting things happening in the industry down there at the moment. So with that, if we can get underway, I think possibly the standout finding for me in the research was we asked people to begin by ranking a number of things by virtue of importance they play. And one of those was player support. And everyone agreed that player support, everybody we asked agreed, player support, really important part of the business, really something that helps with a number of different aspects within the business. But then we asked them to, if they could actually rank investment priorities. The same 5 options were given, but despite player support being ranked as hugely important part of the business, it was the bottom priority for investment. So there's a really big dichotomy there between how people view the role of player support and whether they think it's worth investing in or not, or whether it's bottom of the pile when it comes to investment. It's probably a better way to put that. So Ian, let's start with you. Do you have any sort of insight into why there might be that difference in how people view player support between the investment case and the use case for it?
I think, like most questions you're going to ask, it does really depend in the organization who you're asking. An organization, is a makeup of different people, and it will have some different goals and some different remits. I come probably against where that poll is sort of coming out. Initially, seeing that support, or if we call it customer experience, but I think similar sort of function has value. I don't historically put a lot of stock in that myself. I always thought that was a cohort of individuals that were a little drain on the resources. If they needed to come to us, yes, it might indicate that our services or our website was not good enough. Yes, they might have indicated that we had problems with our processes and that we had some deficiencies there. But when they're engaging or chatting, they're not playing, they're not spending, etc. Those things there, etc., like significant cost for us to staff a team like that, to keep that 24 hours, to engage with people, to fill their time, etc. Quite a burden for an organization. And in fact, if you look, and by all means fight me in the comments on this, there isn't a piece of regulation in the United Kingdom that says you must have a live chat as a B2C operator, right? It's not a mandatory requirement. So we're all doing it. We're all making this sort of thing, which the research we've done internally actually shows that sometimes, to a large extent, value that the player has for us goes down after communication. There's a specific reason for that, and I can come to that later if you want. But that piece of communication is really sometimes an end of a journey. They've come, they've complained, they've had a problem, etc. And that was the pivot point. probably for me, where I went with that journey to be like, well, actually, that shouldn't be the end of the journey. If that piece of support or experience, as we're trying to badge it and put it, can be a savior and use it as a retention sort of struggle. Actually, there is a bit of value in someone that probably came to vent and complain and probably was at the end of their journey. They've given you a final straw to clutch at. They've given you, as a punter, they've reached out to you, give you an opportunity to fix something. And for sure, we as businesses, whether you're in the regulated sphere or not, you can't give everything, right? You can't give away the house. When someone asks you for something, you can't give it all away. So you do have to pick your battles on that. You have to listen to what's being asked and give a reasoned sort of response to that. So it was quite a bit of a journey over the last couple of years. And this company certainly helped with it, about how we've transitioned a little bit to pay much more attention nowadays to where that value is. Measuring it has always been difficult, and I think that's probably what we'll be talking a bit about now, about how you can do it better, how you can find better value in it that is measurable.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, from a consumer's point of view, which I can probably offer a bit here, I think the live chat support as a player is really useful for things like withdrawal is still a bit clunky on a lot of operators' websites, for example, and having the ability to chat in around that is very valuable, particularly when I know that there are, in the UK at least, 200 other operators I can go and, as soon as I get annoyed with one, I can go and sign up. There's super movability between companies. So, Danis, what about you? What's the view at Entain around the importance of investing in the sort of player support function?
I mean, the answer is super clear. It's one of the priorities. So the support is the essential function. So the customers have to be happy. Yeah. And again, we don't live in the era of the low CPA. We don't live in the era of large amount of the high value customers. We don't live in the era where the market is growing with the huge speed. Yes. So every single customer is very important. Yes. So crucially important. Yeah. Same time, still a lot of goodwill requests coming from the support or through the support agency. Yes. So you have to filter a lot of the things out. But again, that's the first contact point with the brand. That's the first contact point with the product. In most of the cases, that's the customer service agent. Yes. So that's why it's very important, to set up all the process and make sure that you will do your best in order to keep players happy and to give them back what they came for.
Yeah. I mean that's really interesting. In my previous life, where I worked in marketing and branding consultancies, we would always say that your brand is every single touch point that the customer has with your business. So it frustrates me when you have
exactly
when I see businesses spending huge amounts of money on advertising, but then not worrying too much about the intricacies of customer experience and supporting players if they have problems when they get on site. So that's a really interesting approach you've got there. And Scott, what about you? What are you seeing at Superbex? I know this is slightly outside your remit, this kind of decision.
Slightly, or a lot, it might be, but I think really a lot of it, if we look at sort of the data there from the reports, is it comes back to measurement. It's very, very hard to quantify the value of that interaction. It's relatively easy to quantify market and spend to new players, market and spend to retention. It's more difficult to look at, okay, are CS agents setting the tone? Is that working effectively to retain our players? Because it's very, very difficult to measure it. And I'd be very interested to work out how we do it. Because you could have 10 conversations, one of them comes back, but there's nothing to say that the reason they came back was that conversation, or was it the bit of marketing we sent them shortly after?
Yeah, I mean, that's the dilemma of the online world, isn't it? Measurability and so on. And I believe Phil will have, when we get a little bit later into the discussion, I think Phil might have some insights on measurability and customer journey and so on. But Phil, do you want to perhaps just finish off on this point? You obviously, you spend a lot of time speaking to betting operators, casino operators about exactly this kind of problem they've got and what they might want to invest in and so on. So what do they say to you about this situation?
There's so many ways to tackle this. Part of it is, I think, looking at what the function of support is and also what type of operator you are. So if you're used to a higher amount of player churn, if you're in sweeps or something like that, it's going to be a very different conversation from an online casino. A lot of operators too came from forums and dealing with tickets. So really they came from the perspective of issue handling time. And I think where people are migrating now through live chat and even AI agents is looking at engagement outcomes and even player sentiment. And so now that we have the tools to actually monitor in real time things like player sentiment, do better quality assurance so agents can be better trained. I think we would all agree, let's say outside of gaming, whether you're dealing with a telco or a utility or any kind of engagement, if they're not taking a look at your data and they're not training their agents properly, you're absolutely going to lose that person, or you're gonna leave them with a worse experience than they were before they started a support interaction. So I think the key is, how can you at scale train people to do a really good job and then make them think beyond just handling the problem at hand, taking a look at the data and patterns and even identifying things like opportunities for growth or new products, and looking at what a player is doing to introduce them to other areas other than just providing them with a bonus or something like that. And I think that evolution comes as part of a technical evolution, but it's also kind of a mindset. And what we see, the top operators are saying, hey, it's really expensive to get players now, right? A lot of the ways that we've been marketing in the past, even the way affiliates are working, is being thrown on its head by large language models and other things. How can we take the players that we already have, right, that we already have a relationship with, and get more out of them? And part of that is the support experience. It's not the be-all, end-all of it, but it is, again, as you pointed out, sort of a touch point that I think is a really important touch point. The more value you can get from that, especially when you have a relationship, you're more likely to retain those players and get more revenue out of them than you are if you provide sort of more of that issue handling time kind of a mindset. If you're looking at it in a more expanded way.
Sure. And I think some of that might fit into the next finding, which we asked respondents to the survey to look at things from the other way, which is now we're moving into an era where budgets are getting tighter. And I think particularly those of us who work in the UK will very much recognise this with the tax changes coming in, but that's also the case in Brazil and Mexico and so on as well. We asked, what would you cut first? What would you cut last? And strangely enough, help desk and support operations were the last thing that operators wanted to cut from that spend. So I don't know if we're just going to perhaps cover the same ground if I come back to you again, Ian. Does that finding make sense to you? Does that sort of resonate with how you see business priorities?
Yeah, I think we are all afraid to make a cut there. I think it's maybe been a bit underinvested over the years anyway, so it's not necessarily got a lot of fat to it. So cutting it maybe is not always obvious. There's normally some reasonable data from most CRM structures, most customer management structures. There's normally some good data. So there's normally say, look, we don't have agents that are currently doing nothing, right? They're taking this many chats, they're responding to this many emails, they're answering this many telephone calls. So that work is being done, and then your CFO, your finance team are seeing, okay, well, actually, there's value there, right? Everyone's busy, like we've got 100% capacity or whatever. Everyone's involved with that. So maybe there's not as much area to trim on it. And then we've all got that fear factor, which was already sort of mentioned, that if you don't have it, right, what's that going to do? I went to an operator, a competitor yesterday, and they were quite brazen in there. in their pop-up for their chat said, "We will answer you within 10 minutes." I thought that was pretty bold, right? That would put me off straight away. And I think we've all just said that kind of thing. That is a touch point that would upset you. I wouldn't have said it like that. I wouldn't have structured it to be like, "I'll be with you, but give me 10 minutes." You know, if we're on the phone and we wait for 10 minutes, we're furious. Likewise, chat, we've got a bit more flexibility because we can multitask while we're doing it. But nonetheless, you know, we build our structures to try and be responsive. And then probably that final point is that we also don't want to give it up because we expect regulators to want it, right? And like I've already made that point, might not necessarily be written in the regulations, but it is sort of there. You know, it's heavily implied, so you'd be at risk to take it away in terms of the things that players might communicate with you. So I think a little bit in that area, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely makes sense. And is that the similar sort of thinking for you, Dennis, at Entain?
I mean, for me, this split makes total sense because, like, first of all, when it comes to the support operations, most of the cases these are the fixed costs that you can't be that much flexible with changing them, like in the short run. When it comes to the marketing, like we all know, like usually marketeers do some high risk deals, etc. They can sacrifice quite easily, yes. So with quite questionable ROI and so on. So that's why, first of all, you reduce the marketing, you cut the deals or the projects that you're not that super sure about, and then you keep everything that makes sense and that needs to be there. Yeah, and again, support from my perspective, and like it's a hygiene factor. Yeah, so it should be there no matter what. Yes, so that's why it will be affected as the last one.
Sure. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me as from a business perspective that you wouldn't want to do things that really risk you losing players that you spent a lot of money to acquire at the top point. It's a safety net in a lot of cases. I guess the support function. Okay, I'm not sure if anyone else has got anything to add on that bit. Worry about time of the discussion. We've got quite a lot of things to go through, so perhaps if we can push on a little bit. And we have a poll, which I believe if anyone in the audience wants to contribute to, you can just go into the chat, perhaps, and give us an idea of that. So we're just looking at, you know, where does customer support sit in your strategy? Do you view it as a core driver, sort of central to both retention and responsible gambling? Do you think it's at the moment important but underfunded? Primarily a reactive service, or has a minimal role today, but you're planning to expand a little bit on that. So feel free to contribute a little bit in the chat function if you want to with that. But moving on a little bit, I'm interested here, and perhaps Phil, we can go to you on this. It's when you're speaking to operators, and we know there's a little bit about this. We've seen there's the dichotomy between people don't want to invest, but they also don't want to cut investment. They recognise how important it is. What do you think it is that's holding people back from perhaps investing a little bit more in this player support technology, or the wider player support function, I guess, even staff and so on?
So I think both Ian and Scott kind of nailed it. I think part of it is the measurement, and then part of it is scale. So I think some of the operators are looking at it as just, hey, the more players we have, the more volume, the more inquiries we have, the more we're going to spend on this. But I think the other side of it is, it really varies depending on the operator, and then it varies depending on how they're able to measure. So for me, yes, there's perception, I think, to a degree. I'd say less so. I think there's definitely an understanding that it's an important function. I think retention is sort of another question, right? That really varies from operator to operator, whether they see this as a really important function for, and maybe not retention, but more revenue growth is the way that I'd look at it. And then the more advanced vendors that we work with are measuring the heck out of everything. They're measuring how fast they're doing issue handling. They're connecting all these things to their CRM. They're taking a look at player sentiment. They're taking a look at broader spotlights or outcomes. And so they don't really have the same legacy structures because they're pushing forward. And then the other thing is the size of the business. So if you're a startup and you're coming in, there's no way that you have the funding to do things like quality assurance, right? You might be trying to figure out, hey, if I'm starting a sweep in the US, like, or let's say, any variant of the sort of traditional types of gambling, do I just use an AI agent instead of having, all those conversations are a little bit different, depending on how much funding and how much legacy data you have to look at as well. So I think measurement is really the key to this. If you are taking the time to measure, you're seeing the value. If you don't have the capacity to measure yet, or you don't have the scale yet to measure, it doesn't really make sense. Sure.
And I think there's some interesting, I guess, if I have the time to dig back into the data, and I know we've written the reports already, it'd be interesting to see the differences in markets. So if you think in the US, share price for all these operators is driven very much by first-time deposit numbers every quarter that they produce, and that seems to be more important than retaining players and making a profit in the short term. Whereas I think certainly looking at the UK operators, the money at the bottom of the report is the important bit, and we think we see a bit more investment in retention strategy and so on there. But while I'm offering that opinion, of course, I'm probably the least expert person on this panel to be offering that. So, Scott, what do you think might be holding back this sort of investment?
It's a mixture of perception and a measurement, and I think you really hit the nail on the head there. It all depends on the market as well, because if we look at what does a US player expect, what does a UK player expect, they are a little bit different in terms of support. Everyone in the UK has live chat. Very rare you find an operator that doesn't now. Not regulated, but it is almost expected by the regulator that we have a live chat function somewhere on the site for players to get in touch. So you find that a much bigger driver than in the US. Stick an AI chat agent on because share price is driven by first-time deposit, not the bottom line, and that probably leads into it a little bit in terms of the perception. Measurement we've touched on multiple times. How do you quantify that? But if we go back to the poll, it's got to be a core driver. If you consider CS is first contact point and potentially last contact point with a player, you can either drive a really good relationship from the beginning, or you can make it come to an end quite quickly if they're not on brand. And how difficult is it right now to get an AI agent to stay on brand?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, which I think Phil and Najam might have some opinions on when we get to the little bit about the use of AI later on. I mean, I know I said at the start when we talked beforehand, don't sell things, don't talk too much about technology in a salesy sort of way and so on. But I was genuinely staggered by some of the capabilities of some of this stuff now. Makes me glad I'm in my 50s. I'm nearing retirement because I'm not entirely sure how much career path people will have in certain jobs, and my job in the media in particular is one of them. But that's a different issue, I guess. I mean, Danis, what do you think is what might? Because you've been quite positive about what Entain are doing, and you are investing. You do see the value in the player support technology and systems and so on. What do you think might be holding back perhaps other people from making this kind of investment?
I believe that's the most complicated question that we will have during this panel. That's the combination of all together, and I believe the majority they do understand that there is a value in the great customer service, but since we're coming to the measurement, it's almost impossible to get like the very precise ROI for this function, or like for this investments. That's what is holding back some of the operators, And again, a lot of people see this more like as a cost center than as a service. So that's why, I mean, like very complicated function, let's call it comparable to marketing or to product, like more boring, so repetitive things from day to day, so it doesn't look attractive for a lot of people, so they tend to switch more towards marketing communication or product development. So this operational things, it's not for everyone. So that's why they are like tend to be more towards like investing in some other functions like sales, marketing communication, or product. So again, long story short, the value is there, but maybe just like to measure or to understand the value is more complicated.
Sure.
Interesting on that. Sorry, Martin, just to jump in here a little bit, is it's seen as a cost center. And if we look at compliance in general, for 5 or 6 years ago, we were simply seen as a cost center, whereas now you see compliance as, most operators do now, a central focus and actually a collaborative partner that adds value. How far away is CS from being at that level?
But compliance, like it wasn't like internal decision for most of the companies. It was like they were forced to do this. So that's a different topic. So that's why 5 years ago there was like 10 times less compliance people than today. Now, like online gambling or any other gambling is more like banking. It's compliance first. So you start with compliance and then you do all the rest.
Sure. And Ian, I don't know if you've got anything to add to this bit of the discussion.
What I'm seeing on the screen here is like, I'm not sure it's the key to retention. It is important. From our perspective, we've got really good data. I'm very pleased with that data. Our data team's amazing, and they give us a lot to work with. But when that really lands, and you see that really at absolute maximum, you're only talking to 20% of your active base, or I suppose they're talking to you, that is going to drive that decision for you a little bit, right? So it is a relevant factor for sure. And it's interesting to put it into retention, which at the beginning of this, we started to refer to acquisition and retention. That's quite a marketing-focused function. Marketing teams are pretty strong in organizations. They've got significant budgets, etc. So then those cost centers, are sort of fighting over a piece of a pie and maybe control of it. Do you want your marketing team to run your support team, etc.? Probably not. That's coming from me, at least. Ultimately, like the measurement is there. And the best thing, I believe the business, and we're always trying to do, is teach the whole business what players are talking to us about and why, right? So we know at the start of last year, I was going to say this year, but at the start of last year, significantly more sports players were talking to us. So our casino base, a very small proportion of our inbound communications. That leads us on a bit of a journey. Why do we have more sports communications? Why are people asking us about sports? What do sports players need more than others? Maybe there is something on site. Maybe there is something in terms of bet settling. Maybe the products that we're offering them, have they being understood that? The promotions that are being offered them. Tweaks to that, we've moved that journey to a little bit more 50-50 now. So, we've balanced that. There is a lot to measure it there. So it is hopefully then going to be used to teach the rest of the organization. And once you sort of shine a light on a few areas and the power of that inbound communication, even though it is a small sample of your active base, then there's probably an opportunity to open up a little bit of extra budget.
Sure. So you get some real-time product testing information really coming back from paying customers, which is a nice thing. So the cynic in me wonders a little bit whether the sales and marketing functions in business, by virtue of what they actually do, the skills the people have got, they're a bit better at selling in the importance of their bit than the customer service director is. But that's I guess that depends on the personalities involved in each individual business. Now, Najum, I'm very conscious that I haven't actually come to you and asked you to say anything apart from introduce yourself so far. So let's change that now. One of the things that emerged as that operators were most worried about in customer support is not actually the people who are contacting customer support. It was silent churn. So essentially, that's a fancy way of saying players who just leave for the competition without actually telling you they've left for the competition. What can you tell us a little bit about those findings, Nedra?
Is now. Oh, right. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that Ian made in the beginning. Is now that we have data, and that if you can connect it to your CRM and have real-time monitoring, you can get a lot more information, like forward-facing information about how your players are interacting with your platform. And it's not just about, so whether it's a common complaint that you're hearing from a bunch of other players, whether you're seeing a lack of interactions in general, I think you can get a lot of critical information that can help you figure out what you need to do to improve, essentially reduce silent churn. So sentiment monitoring, for instance, can give you a better idea about how certain players, like what are the most common complaints they have, whether it's around a particular game, withdrawals, something like that. And then you can take action around it. Like these are leading indicators. Historically, without this information, companies only had lagging indicators to work with. So yeah, I think real-time analytics and sentiment monitoring can be critical in managing expectations and also helping companies plan out their strategy going forward. So CS, and I think I also want to talk about something that Scott said earlier, is historically CS has been a cost center, right? Information like this can help turn it into a profit center going forward.
Sure. That's an interesting point. Particulars, I think we're likely to be moving. I mean, player retention has always been an important part of profitability, but as we look at pressures coming on around compliance, around taxation, stricter regulation, and so on, I think that sort of retention piece is going to become possibly significantly more important than acquisition, or at least as important. And these tools, I imagine, are going to be hugely valuable for operators. So Danis, I don't know, without giving away too many trade secrets about what you're doing behind the scenes at Entain, can you see the value in these kind of real-time analytics? Is it something you're already perhaps involved in a little bit, or is it on the roadmap?
Absolutely, yeah. Because there are markets, especially in Europe, in the north side, when people, they don't really complain, so they will never come if something will happen. Yeah, so that's why I always telling we have to be very thankful for the players who come with their problems, challenges, when they found some bugs on the platform, or I don't know, they're not happy with some marketing campaigns, because that's the feedback we want to receive. Yeah, there are certain countries when people will never complain. They will switch immediately to the any other side that's available, regulated, unregulated. So that's why for this specific countries, yeah, it's a lot of things are established. For the real-time analytics, maybe less real-time, more post factum, that you analyze where players drop. You try to understand the reasoning behind. You try to understand these drop points, etc. Yes, so that's very important. Not for all the markets, but for certain geographical locations, that's the must.
Sure. And Scott, what about how do you see this at Superbet, which I don't think I'm exaggerating to say you're quite renowned for the technology and so on you use at Superbet. It's a big part of your offer.
It is, and yeah, this has to be done. You're talking to 20% of your base. They've used the product. They understand what's wrong with the journey or where they dropped off. Why have they then had to come to CS? If you can optimize that journey, it will then mean that you'll retain the player without them ever having to speak to CS. So one of the things that I do like to look at and I do like to track is if there is a new compliance change, are we seeing CS contact based on that change? And if we are, what can we do within the product to streamline that? And look, some cases, the answer is we can't do anything. But in some cases, we can look at, okay, you're dropping off at this point. Do we move the button? Something as simple as moving a checkbox can sometimes improve a journey because it's in a different place on the screen. And that's why sort of the UX people are much smarter than me when it comes to, if we change this button, it might make it a bit better. But if your players are telling you there's something wrong with a specific journey, we really need to start listening to it to then understand where we can improve.
Sure. No, I think that that makes perfect sense. Now, I'm sort of fairly conscious of time moving on, and we haven't really touched on the topic of use of player support in its role in player protection or safer gambling type uses. So there's a lot of talk around about how AI can be used to sort of help teams move towards earlier interventions and so on. Ian, how are you seeing that sort of coming together? Sort of how you're integrating responsible gambling and support and the support functions at Quiff at the moment, and how do you see that playing out as the technology evolves? Are you likely to see sort of closer relationships between those functions?
Yeah, like anyone that has an operational focus and engages with any kind of player data, whether it's the player themselves or the data that comes from them, really has a bit of a role to play in safer or responsible gambling in your regulator's eyes. When you have communication with your player, i.e. they respond to your emails or they come to you with telephone calls or they send you live chats, etc., you're going to have a record of that for quite a time. Your tools are going to keep that, and that is really strong chance it's going to hurt you in the future if it wasn't well handled. Those things are coming out either more aggressively directly from players, right? They're becoming much more aggressive and litigious and challenging and pushing operators. I would say, they think they know regulations pretty well, but you can normally sort of tell it's a ChatGPT version of the interpretation of regulations. So when they're challenging, they might have missed the mark a little bit, but they feel very emboldened and they'll push you a lot and try and find weaknesses in your armor, etc. And your own communications, they'll probably be willing to use against you, as would a regulator when they find you've missed some parts of some communication. And listen, clearly what we're trying to say here is if you're going to use humans that maybe, didn't sleep super well last night because their kids were crying, or maybe they got a bit of a hangover this morning, maybe they're not optimal, they're not 100% all the time, or they took literally 1,000 chats in a day, or, when I started in this industry, I was doing this kind of thing. I was doing support sort of functions, and, you'd have the bad ones, the really, really, really bad ones where people would say, the gamblers cause them the ultimate harm and they're going to take a certain action, which we almost don't like to speak about, but that knocks you for six for a little bit. So everything that comes after that, are you functioning super well? So there is sort of a position here that you have to take defensively as a business to protect yourself from making those kind of mistakes. And historically, what we've done, and we'll continue to do that, is when a person makes a mistake, you go to that person, you take it out on that person, right? They'll have a disciplinary, they'll be removed from the company. Look, you didn't spot that person and that complaint and what that really meant in practice. We've got to protect the business, contracts allow this, this is something that's damaged the business. You'll go through a disciplinary process for that. Now what we're leaning towards is trying to give a bit more support, hopefully directly to those individuals, say, hey, these kind of tools, etc., this kind of monitoring, this kind of reactive, next day, look back, or real-time red flags that goes to team leaders, etc. They've got your back in case you're having a bad one. We've got some support for you here. But if that should ever fail, like regulators have already told us a couple of times that they don't really trust the AI structure. They want to see the code, they want to see the algorithms, they want to dig into it. They're not very trusting on that, and that's a bit worrying, right? We're told to be faster, we're told to be real time, we're told to have much greater level of protection, and yet they also don't trust these kind of LLMs or other solutions that are going to come because they don't believe we understand them. They don't believe that the player will understand them. They want to see how it works, etc. As in, there's humans there at a regulator that doesn't trust it either. So we've got a huge trust factor we've got to get over from a regulatory sphere before we can really embed that, I think, very strongly.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, there's an interesting legal case coming for somebody around AI compliance systems when there hasn't been a human that's made a mistake. It's been a system that's made hasn't been trained correctly, or perhaps has dealt with something that hasn't been foreseen when they're setting up the system. But Scott, what about you? Are you involved in sort of using some of this, integrating the player support and the compliance with responsible gambling function, and are you taking advantage of some of this AI technology at the moment, or testing it?
AI technology is great. It's not at the level where it can replace a human yet. And I think you're right. We're going to see somebody hold over the coals, probably in the UK, because an AI chat agent made the interaction, took action on the account, and it done something wrong. In terms of joining RG and support, not completely, but there is generally links between them. Support agents have to be able to spot the cases in the same way that you could look at the data and spot it. If they're on the live chat there, we can take immediate action. I think they do still need to be completely separate functions, because that RG and then sort of taking it to the next level needs a little bit more training. That generally, if we look at the support agents, the churn on them is quite high. Having worked in that sector before, you don't keep support agents very long unless they then want to move into a more responsible, either an RG role, a compliance role, or something else within the industry. It's more of a doorway in. So do we really want to spend all of that time training someone to be able to do the RG role alongside the support role? Or do we keep the RG team and support is essentially the way in?
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So one of the findings, if I think I'm recalling this correctly, Phil, was that one of the things operators were most reluctant to use AI technology in the player support function for was that responsible gambling piece. But it felt a bit like, from the responses we had, they perhaps weren't fully aware of the scope of some of the things that could be achieved. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that when you look at the constraints that are involved, so especially for the larger operators, you're dealing with a whole bunch of different support channels, a whole bunch of different languages, different generational preferences. You have communications that are synchronous versus asynchronous. You have different rules and policies that are constantly changing. You have approaches that are maybe proactive or reactive, depending on the organization. And then you're looking for different things, right? You have security concerns. Like, there's a whole bunch of phishing attempts that come in with support requests. There's do we want to look for AML or not, right? That's a big sort of question for operators. And then there's player health. So training a human being on all of those different factors is really difficult. But who wants to trust a system that can hallucinate and do all these other things when you're talking about things like player health? Nobody, right? So I think the operators that are thinking about this in a more advanced way are saying, hey, we can have an initial barrier system of maybe something like an AI agent. The second it even detects the slightest whiff that this might be an issue related to RG, it gets moved and shifted to a person, ideally, who has the skills to handle it. And we deal with different support teams, where some support teams, they treat all their support agents really as having the same level of training, depending on their size. And then as operators get larger, people specialize in terms of skills about, is it somebody who can handle larger bonuses? Is it somebody who handles VIPs? Is it somebody who handles RG issues? And that, so it really depends. I think the key is having the flexibility as you grow as an organization size, depending on how many brands you're offering, the different types of gaming or gambling that you're offering, that you have the ability to handle synchronous, asynchronous, automated or not, but that you have a really strong structured process around RG, and that you're looking for the things that you want to look for and you want to take care of. And I think every operator sort of approaches that in a different way. My last point is, I think having a really strong audit record, I think, is going to become much more important over the next few years, because these systems are increasingly taking more and more of the burden of having these player interactions. So I think having a proper audit record, a proper way of structuring how you are responding to all of those different constraints is something that could, if not take away something like a fine, it would definitely blunt the blow to a degree if you can show that you're doing everything you can to think about the experience of the player, but also within the constraints of all of those other factors, which are really difficult things for an operator to deal with, right? Within, as we already pointed out, the walls of those budgetary constraints that people have. And I think that's what everybody's struggling with. And so they're looking for bright spots, like who has found that right balance of how to deal with all those factors, but create the best player experience out of that, and especially protect player health. I think that's the one thing that every operator would agree with, that player health is sort of paramount.
Yeah, I think that's right. And oddly, just the slide that's on the screen at the moment, if you look at the second answer there, where people felt support operations could contribute greatly to sort of personalised care for VIPs, if we're still allowed to call them VIPs, well, certainly the higher value players. That was the other area where people expressed concerns about handing things over to automated systems rather than having a sort of a trained agent dealing with the inquiries from those players. So I wondered, Danis, perhaps how do you think we can improve trust when it comes to AI? Not necessarily for the players, because actually what the players should see is no difference in the interaction between a human and a bot agent, but certainly sort of behind the scenes at operators and with regulators.
The trust will be there, just like with time. So it's quite obvious, yeah. So the AI will just getting better with every next day. So the trust will be there, yeah. So anyway, in the majority of the operators, I do believe this functions like the general customer service and the high value customer service, they are like separated, and it will be less AI in the high value customer segment, and will be more AI, more automatization in the general customer service. So yes, and again, anyway, all the major decisions, they, at least in the upcoming future, will be made by the human. So AI will just support, like, with filtering, segmenting, analyzing, collecting the data, just presenting in a better way. So, and just improving the speed for analysis and for the data collection. At least that's how I see this. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, and I'm sure that will be a topic that a lot of us will be returning to a lot over the next couple of years. That trust in AI and so on. I think we're probably about out of time. Just looking at the producer sitting slightly off screen to my right here. Perhaps we'll look at one more question just to wrap things up. It should be, actually, this is an interesting one. We asked respondents to the survey how they identified at-risk or frustrated players. Now, typically, I think what we were talking about here is not in an RG context. This was a bit more in a retention type context. How do you get to grips with the people who are silently unhappy, I guess, is the way you might say it. What do you think, maybe, Ian? Is that manual monitoring? A lot. That's the top sort of answer that people are using at the moment. Is that the way forward? Is that the most effective thing, or do you think there might be some more sort of technological solutions to that?
Martin, you make it sound quite scary, right? Silent monitoring.
Yeah.
I feel like, that's sort of a political thing that's kicking around at the moment, like how much is a Big Brother watching us? But it is a reality. And I think a little bit of what we just heard there, Dennis was saying, this point that like the AI and the trust, etc., that we're all having to give now. So there's a transition point. I look at my father, a little bit of an older, like how he handles these kind of things. Then I think about how I handle these kind of things to try and get a sense of reality of it, etc. Now, I get pretty exhausted when I talk to a human that's stuck on a script. It's almost worse than an AI. So we can then see the benefits if we're using it practically of these things, giving us a better opportunity of it. And the reality is we've been monitored for a while with our internet services or internet usage, the things that we buy, how we buy them, profiling, etc. It's all getting better. That big brotherness of it all. So I think we just have to be quite more honest with it, right? And put it in people's faces that, hey, you're now going to talk to a bot for a little bit. You don't always need to. We might transition to that. Don't worry, your gaming activity, we're always monitoring it. We might use bots to do that, but we also use humans to do that. You really have to mix it all in. And then when we're looking at that really complex question, which you're saying, which is like someone does something, but they don't tell you they're going to do it. So now you're looking at identifying churn or churn identifying models to a certain extent. It's quite a complex and a data science driven area to identify the signals that an individual are going to be emitting. I'm depositing less, my frequency is changing, my login sessions are shorter, etc. Where I've come from before, or I can see I've come from a competitor site when I've come here, or the things that I've come to from a search engine, or how the large language model has directed to me. Yeah, there's value in that, and I think naturally all of us are going to go with that in the future and use those kind of marketing analysis tools for the encouragement of business and business operations. But obviously, we're all going to say that with the sentiment that we want to protect the players, we don't want to take them too far. We do want to keep that we're getting a market share and a share of wallet as much as our competitors are doing when we're on an equal level licensed playing footprint. Yeah.
You are making me hanker a little bit for the days where I could just walk down to the bookmaker's shop in the village. And it was all about whether or not my horse won, and that was about as complex as it got. But it is fascinating, some of the technology that is now available. And perhaps Najim, just come to you for a final word before we finish, because you've been looking at some of this stuff as well about identifying these sort of frustrated players and so on. Over the next sort of year, 2 years or so, what sort of things do you think will be available? What sort of technological solutions are going to be available to operators to deal with this?
That is a very tough one. I'll tell you that even in the past, I would say 3 years, we have seen technology evolve from simple question answer formats to like now detailed agentic AI. So what I can tell you, it's very hard to say what sort of technology would be available, but I can tell you that we've already moved from deterministic pipelines, which is agent X does Y and then so forth, to agentic pipelines, which is the AI agent itself checks whether if it's doing stuff the right way. So there are quality controls in place now. So going forward, I think the potential is endless. From manual monitoring, I think in terms of monitoring, the amount of data that companies will get will be massive, right? And then you will have AI analyzing this data as well. We're already seeing that. We're in the early stages of seeing AI very carefully analyzing data, trends at certain times of the day, trends of how people are interacting with platforms. So yeah, and I think all of this feeds into a much bigger conversation about how to then use this data, right? Because CS teams can work with a whole bunch of other departments in figuring out campaigns to work on in the future. And then ultimately it all boils down to how you train your agents better. So I think, yeah, it's going to be very exciting as we move I would say, in the real agentic world. Phil, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I think that for me, I just boil it back to AI is just a tool, right? So it's a tool that will help us accomplish different things in different ways. The most important thing is for an operator, how do you create the most efficient, best support experience that you can within the constraints that you have? And so I think this is just a tool that will now allow operators to do a little bit more and do some more exciting things within certain constraints. But it will also depend on the approach that you want to take and what your size is and what your scale is. And I think, Dinas, you made an awesome point too, like, taking a look at, this is a sensor, right, as part of the overall picture, which is a much bigger picture. And Ian, you made this point really well too, I think, there's a certain amount of data, but that data that you can capture within this environment, what you do with it can actually have a measurable impact on the business. It really just depends on kind of where you're at and where your scale is. I was going to say, I think we're probably at time. Martin, would you agree?
Yes, and I tell you what, as I'm always dreadful at rounding these things off and finishing them off, I'm going to let you hand over to you to do the outro, I think, Phil.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say for Dinas, Ian, and Scott, thank you guys again so much for participating in this, and for everybody who has stuck with us through this or will be watching this later. Please download this research. There's actually 3 reports here. They're really, really interesting. There's a ton of data that we haven't covered off today that I think you'll find really interesting, that comes again from over 75 operators at the C-suite level, really walking through a lot of these issues in more detail. We're also going to be at ICE in a couple of weeks. I can't believe it's a couple of weeks. I literally am jet lagged from a trip to Australia. So please come and see us at ICE. At worst, we'll give you some Canadian maple syrup at our booth, and would love to show you at least our approach for how we're tackling some of these problems. There's a lot of fantastic companies in the space. And so, yeah, we'd love to meet you in person at ICE, or any of the bigger events that are happening this year. So again, thank you everybody for attending, and big thanks to SBC too for working with us through the trials and tribulations of collecting all of this data and putting it together.
Okay, well, with that, just remains for me to say thank you very much to all our panelists and to all of you who've been watching along with it. And yeah, as Phil said, download the reports. We'll also include the links in the email we send out to you to say thanks for attending, which will be coming out a bit later on this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everyone, bye.